Okay, welcome everyone. I'm Victor Menasce here. I'm here. I'm excited to have John Moriarty with me. We are going to be talking about multi-generational wealth. I'm Victor Menasce, partner here at Y Street Capital, and we're going to be having a great session on specifically how to talk about multi-gener managing your assets over multiple generations. It's an important conversation, irrespective of how much money you have, and love this kind of conversation. It's one that's near and dear to my heart. John, why don't we start with a little bit of an introduction?
Sure. Thank you, Victor, for having me on the podcast and the webinar. John Moriarty, founder, president of E3 Consultants Group. Been in the industry for 30 years. E3's been in existence since 2003, and we have a business model that really serves a lot of areas of financial services. We've got a wealth management arm, our own RIA, tax firm, deal in insurance, have estate planning resources, and also have a family office that serves business owners and entrepreneurs. So kind of built that business model to kind of bring customized scope of services to individuals, families, business owners, and entrepreneurs.
Love it. Well, John, we're going to be talking about multi generational wealth. And I'm going to start it almost from maybe even from a personal perspective. Uh, my grandfather was an inventor, he was an entrepreneur. He started many businesses, first in Italy, then moved to New York during the war, and amassed a fair bit of wealth. He then transferred that, of course, to the next generation. We've all heard this story. The folks that build the wealth are not the same folks that are necessarily the greatest stewards of it, and usually by the third generation, it's gone. And the goal here is to enable that to perpetuate. So there's a number of elements that come into play here. One of them, of course, having to do with how to manage the multi generational family assets. The second is how to establish governance, because we all have children, and our offspring are all different. And some people, money is just fuel,
Mm.
because at the end of the day, some people will take money and whatever belief system they have. If they know how to multiply money, the more money they have, the more they'll multiply. Other folks know how to spend money, and if they have more money, they'll just spend it faster. And we have examples of both of those in my family, as I'm sure in every family.
Mm.
So I think there's a couple of different threads to pursue here. But maybe the place to start, uh, because this isn't just a question about investing or the best investing strategy. It really starts with understanding the family values. And I'm going to assert that for everybody, and I don't care how you typecast yourself, for everybody, money should go into one of four buckets. There's a safety bucket. This is maybe the gold coins under your mattress. They're untouchable. There's a cash flow bucket. There's a growth bucket. And then there's a risk bucket. And the discussion would really just center around what is the appropriate asset allocation between those four buckets. Everyone has all four, whether they acknowledge it or not. And the key from a governance standpoint is to gain alignment for the family on how those four should be managed, so that there's at least an operating manual for the family, because it's not an individual's money. It is, at the end of the day, the family's money first and foremost, and then it cascades from there. What are your thoughts?
Well, I love the mindset behind understanding whether it's the buckets or the purpose of those dollars. When we talk with a lot of our clients, we talk about building wealth, and then also while you're building wealth, you're also looking to reduce opportunity costs. Tax mitigation is one of those things, but also how you structure the assets, how you plan for those to transfer, from a generational perspective, especially if you're the first generation wealth creator in the family, your focus is so much on the wealth building that it's not that you ignore those other things, but you're building from scratch. So your primary focus is, I just want to build this wealth as great as it can be, And then over time, you start to realize, okay, I've done a really good job of that. Now, how do I manage it? Like you said, how do I manage it? What is the governance? And then what are the vehicles, whether they be the legal entity vehicles, and then also what is the family dynamic and how we manage that from the governance. So I think that to me, people's relationship with money changes over time.
Yeah.
But as you look to be more dynastic with your wealth, meaning I want to build something that's going to last multiple generations. Can I get it past that third generation, which is the sticking point? I really feel like that mindset and then working with professionals that can help you kind of think through that and customize, to your point, Victor. Every family's different. No matter how they built their wealth, no
Yep.
matter what types of assets they own, every family's different. So the customization of that really hits home. And there's some great success stories there, and there's some horror stories. So I think you're really hitting on the core elements of this.
And then, of course, life is complicated. You know, sometimes there's a second marriage, there's stepchildren involved, there's maybe a third marriage. Who knows? Life gets complicated. And so now what starts out as a fairly simple tree like structure now starts to look a bit more like a plate of spaghetti. And how do you, I mean, apart from dealing with all those corner cases in the last will and testament, when we're talking multi-generational wealth with that additional layer of complexity, how does that, in your experience, influence those governance type conversations?
I think it boils down to what are you really trying to do with the wealth that you built? And sometimes it relates to what's the asset class, right? Is it small business? Is it real estate? Is it, paper assets like equities and brokerage assets? And how you build your wealth and how you look to create liquidity and control, I think is a big element, especially in that first generation. And so what you have to do is you have to use the laws to your advantage. There's a lot of ways to protect your wealth. And the United States is a place where a lot of wealth can be created from the entrepreneurial perspective, but we're also a very litigious society. So you want to use those to your advantage. And I think with different entity structures, different tax structures, there's a lot of benefit there. But what I have seen, the people that are most successful in that process, they educate their family as to what the intended outcome is and what their role is. Honestly, like what is your role as a benefactor of this wealth that's been created, and what is the expectation of you, over time to act as a steward, to, is it to protect it for multiple generations? Is it to use it to grow it? But whatever that is, that's communicated within that family governance. But you've got to use proper structure. And I always say, if you have a financial team that's built around you, a CPA, a state/asset protection attorney, banker, whoever your source of capital is, your finance team, your insurance person. If you have a team that is coordinated in communication, that is acting as an advocate for what you want to see with your family, then things can be structured in a very highly technical, protective way. But you can also build in flexibility. You can also do things to create liquidity. So that's a big thing to me is, how much control do I want to give up versus, really what is that focus? And that all depends. Going back to what you said before, every family's different. So you sort of have to figure that out. Like, what do I want this wealth to do for my family? And then kind of engineer it, the structures around, your intended outcome.
When I think about the different personalities that might be around the table in a family, there's usually one or maybe a handful of individuals that are maybe a bit more business savvy, and they often step into that quasi leadership role. But that also, at the same time, engenders a certain level of mistrust, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
can you talk a little bit about how that impartial role of a third party who's an expert money manager in situations like this can play a role in changing the family dynamics, not just for the folks that really want to be the stewards of the money, but in fact for everyone.
Yeah, that that is an interesting role to be in, and depending on the personalities, that you're dealing with, if that wealth creator, the patriarch, matriarch of the family
Yeah.
has a very demanding personality, or one that's very overt in their direction of what they want to see, and do they have children and grandchildren that are docile, or are they ones that are also have a similar alpha personality, and you're trying to manage, well, you created this, but the world is different now. And what I have found to be successful in that framework is, if you can understand what everybody is coming to the table from, what are their strengths from a personality standpoint, what do they really want to bring to the table. This isn't about what am I getting, this is about what am I bringing to the table, how can I make this work for the family, right? And that's also for the wealth creators. If they are going to be of the mindset that, hey, I'm looking to pass this forward, then that can't be with strings attached in a lot of cases.
Right.
It's that, I think, once you thread the needle there and you get everybody on the same page and realize, hey, we created this, but now we want this to pass forward. How would we like to do that? I've seen a lot of families go through a lot of those conversations and come out the other end with a lot of better understanding of, well, who were their parents and what did they do to get to this point? And it is actually it's vindicating when you can help them get to that point, but it is not a quick process. That could take 3 years, 5 years, sometimes 10 years for them to really see it all the way through. So I to your point of making sure you have the right advisors and the right people kind of advocating for you, that's really one of the most difficult things, is to find those people.
If there's the dedicated single family office and there's a nest egg in the hundreds of millions, there's clearly the assets to afford that function clearly, and benefits just in terms of tax savings from avoided mistakes and all those other things. Where are the thresholds in your estimation? If someone has a net worth of, I don't know, 5 million or 20 million, where are those thresholds where it makes sense to actually engage with somebody, and at what level to get that kind of help?
So I would say, number one, with the advent of more technological resources, and also the capabilities of investors who have, assets in the 5, 10, 20, $50 million range, there's the capability to find resources that family office with $100 million of assets or more, like, you can accomplish a lot of the same things that they would. It's obviously at scale, but what you're looking for is you're looking for proper structure of how your assets are held and protected. You're looking for tax strategy. The tax code is the same, right? So it does your wealth doesn't impact the tax code. The tax code impacts your wealth. So if you can find those resources, and I believe more financial firms are realizing, look, we need to be more of the mindset that we're consulting and bringing services to the table that are customized for the client, not having the client fit in our level of services, whether it be wealth management or tax or whatever. So I think there's more firms out there that are serving ultra high net worth, whatever you want to call that from a scale standpoint. I think once you get into the $5 million range, and that's not investable assets. That could be value of your real estate. It could be your value of your business. All of those things factor in, because the planning that you need at that level is going to be significant, especially if you want to monetize that wealth and then look to pass it on.
One of the things I discovered when both my parents are gone now, and some of that division of assets happens sometimes well, sometimes not. My mother put together a structure that, in retrospect, turned out, I think, to be brilliant, which was she set up a testamentary trust where My father was the income beneficiary of the trust while he was alive, and then my sister and I were the capital beneficiaries of the trust on his demise. So that created a structure that really took that multi-generational view into account, whereas the local, state, or provincial estate, family law would basically say, well, all the money goes here, and that's it, that's
Right.
all. Right. And this is starting to get to some of the structure that you're thinking about. But then even within that, then there's the question of division of assets. So for example, at one point my father made a mistake, and he took the value of the stock portfolio and he said, well, I'm just going to divide it so that it's about equal value. So my sister got 3M shares and I got Nortel shares, which meant that the very day after that division took place, one was going to be higher than the other. What he should have done is said, I'm going to split the portfolio 50-50, and you get half of the 3M shares and you get half of the Nortel shares and so on. So then you're really dealing with something that's truly equal, because otherwise you're building in a a feeling that someone won and someone else
Mm-hmm.
lost in that structure. So you might give someone the beach house in Cape Cod, you might give someone else the cabin in the woods, and you think they're of equivalent value, but maybe they're not in someone's eyes. Can you talk a little bit about how that comes into play, and how that you talked a little bit about liquidity and generating
Mm-hmm.
liquidity, because that makes the discussion easy, but not everything is liquid.
Right. Yep. So I would say that there are some simple methods to try, or simple strategies that create a method of equal distribution. I mean, the quickest thing that comes to mind is obviously life insurance, and using tools like that to create liquidity in different types of trust structures. The other aspect of that is, I what we have seen where things get challenging is you have that first generation building the wealth. They do it a certain way. And then when things go to the second generation, if there's been no communication or no conversation about the assets, it's a vacation home or something else. Even sometimes it doesn't have to be the same nominal value, but there could be an emotional value to certain things, right? Like the one sibling really treasures that lake house for whatever reason because they took their kids there, and then so it would mean more to them to get the lake house versus the stock portfolio or whatever it is. But those conversations don't happen, and then you get into a scenario where, well, we have to sell the lake house or we have to go borrow against it, and it's not opportune time to do that. And I think that is where, again, if you have a team or you can build a team where you're having those conversations and you're more open about the wealth and what other people desire, a lot of good can come from that. And to your point, wealth is fuel, but if people don't understand the purpose of wealth, and maybe they didn't grow up thinking that way, right? Because the parents thought that way, or someone else did that. That's also something where you've got to get people prepared to be in a position like that. So to me, there's way more an emotional construct to it than like the legal or the dollars and cents. And I think that's where finding resources that can have those conversations, but be objective, right? Like no one's judging, no one's telling someone they're right or wrong. It's just, are they being heard?
Absolutely. Well, this is the first in a multi-part series that we'll be doing with John, and so we haven't got deep into the nuts and bolts, the nitty-gritty of strategy. Today is more of kind of a top level, how to think about having these conversations with family members, because guess what? These are often uncomfortable conversations, and so they get avoided. And they're, unless you've had practice at hosting the conversation or opening the conversation without necessarily bringing up a lot of the emotional baggage that comes with it, um, the conversations just never happen. It's like, how many people actually got a great sex education from their parents? Like probably very few, because it was uncomfortable. It's the same sort of thing, and so it's
And let's
important
be
to
clear, Victor, that's not part of our educational series.
okay, yes, 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 yes.
We're not going to go there.
Well, and I was hesitant to even bring that up as a metaphor because I'm not making an off-color joke here or anything
Right.
like that. But it's an uncomfortable conversation, and so it's really about getting with folks that are able to lead the conversation, to host the conversation, and to facilitate it. That's absolutely key. Why don't we stop here and open it up to questions? I know there'll be a ton of questions on strategy as well, which of course we can happily get into. And the the best way to do that, let's see, there should be a Q&A section in your participant window. So if you do have a question, go to the Q&A window in the webinar panel and put your questions there. We'll go through the questions with John. So while we're waiting for the questions to come in, well, let's start with this as a question, John. When we're dealing with real estate, oftentimes it's an illiquid asset. You touched on it briefly, the notion that you often end up in a situation where when money does get passed on, there's a whole bunch of obligations. There can be tax obligations. There can be well, that's probably the biggest one. Whether there's a deemed disposition and a capital gain owing, there might be a recapture. There might be all kinds of different things. And what structures, apart from just life insurance, are going to be the most beneficial to initiate at least that really really important transition?
Yeah, so I think it boils down to when you're looking at assets and you're looking at someone's overall portfolio with wealth. If we come across folks that have highly illiquid assets, primarily, and the way I look at it is, private business and say, real estate, and they
Mm.
haven't built liquid assets that like outside of life insurance or anything else like that would be a part of the conversation to have is what like sometimes people think, well, if I'm just holding cash or I'm just holding liquid assets, maybe it's a brokerage account or whatever, like what's the purpose of that? So you want to have other liquidity. Now, that liquidity could be a line of credit. There's a lot of different things that
Mm.
you could be doing, but the idea is liquidity is there for both opportunities and emergencies, is the way that we look at it. And so an emergency is an untimely death or, a structure that causes an unplanned tax consequence or something like that. So to me, finding those key liquidity tools, which would, you would want to be making sure if you have a banker, like, having those types of resources available, or having assets that can, maybe you don't want to sell the assets, but you can, loan against them, so maybe it's a brokerage account, whatever it is, liquidity is important because of the opportunity and emergencies. Both of those do never show up when expected. That's why they're opportunities and also emergencies. So being prepared in advance to us makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, there's many different structures that can come into play here. We've got a couple of questions around structure here. So trusts they figure centrally in a lot of cases, and there's different types of trusts. There's testamentary trust, there's revocable, irrevocable, a bit of a laundry list of different structures. And of course, jurisdiction matters as well, because what might work in one particular jurisdiction may be less effective in another. Um, we're not going to go too deep in that because that's a multi-hour conversation
Mm-hmm.
by itself. But the question, one of the questions is, when does it make sense to start a trust? Right now he or she has a master holding company with kids as shareholders, an active corporation linked to a holding corp. Um, when would it make sense to attach a trust to that kind of a structure?
So my response to that, just for clarification, I'm not an attorney and I'm not a
Yeah.
CPA. But to me, when if you're talking about holding illiquid assets like a active corporation, or something that you don't have immediate liquidity on, the reason you would probably want to have a trust in place sooner rather than later is upon, the main owner's death of that holding company. You're going to be operating in whatever state you're in by whatever testamentary laws they have, and the trust just gives you more control and bypassing of probate and the capabilities to kind of outline your wishes for what you want to happen with your assets. That doesn't really happen inside of the operating agreement. And it's not really a part of like your entity structure. Really, the trust is there to lay out what you want to happen when you're no longer either, have capacity to make decisions, or you've passed away and now you need someone else to step into your role, which would be the trustee. So I would
Well,
say as soon as possible, right? If you have significant assets that you want to pass on and they don't pass on with a beneficiary, because there's certain assets that have a beneficiary designation that bypasses probate. If you have assets that would go through probate, a trust would eliminate that step.
I'm sure you've seen it. Families end up in a situation where, I don't know, pops or gramps is maybe only has 24 months left. Now there's a sense of urgency around getting something set up. And oftentimes, even then, it's already too late. Can you talk a little bit about emergency procedures to put something in place and what that looks like?
I mean, having if the matriarch patriarch is still alive, the difficulty is, having powers of attorney in place, financial and healthcare, directives are very important because, if you have those in place, then you can act on behalf of those individuals. And that is important when you're dealing with banks, when you're dealing with custodians of accounts, when you're dealing with, just, you're trying to pay bills. To me, this is one of those things where if you have some simple things in place like a revocable living trust, powers of attorney, healthcare directives, and then a few other things that you're looking at if you don't have beneficiary type assets. It's not something that becomes important until it is. And to your point, if someone's in a car accident and let's say they're incapacitated, right? They're in a coma. Like you can't get a trust or a POA in place with that person because they're incapacitated, right? So that's the thing is you really want to try and get some of these things in place when they're not important so that when they do become important, you can utilize those. And that's difficult. Most people
Or,
don't want to do that. It isn't at the top of their to-do list on the week, but I'm sure you've seen it plenty of times, Victor, when somebody comes to you and they're like, oh, and you're like, I'm sorry, but you don't have authorization to make decisions. And sometimes it's like, we're not even really allowed to talk to you because, you don't have
yeah.
that capacity. And that's difficult when you want to help someone, but by, legal standards, you can't.
Galit is asking where we could learn more about structures and how that works. So maybe that would be a good place to introduce your team and
Sure,
how they
sure.
can get in
Well,
touch.
also, I mean, let's not forget the diagram that your team built out that I think was sent to everybody or will be that or these folks will have access to. So that's one thing. Our firm, at e3wealth.com, we talk a lot about these different types of things where wealth and tax and entity structure and asset protection all where that all kind of meets. I would say that and this will be another shameless plug, but our firm wrote a book called The Entrepreneur Playbook. You can find it on Amazon, and audiobook's going to be shortly released, and we talk a lot about this as well. But what I will say is, this is again where the advent of technology is amazing. You could literally Google, and if you have ChatGPT or you have Claude, like you can have these conversations, and I've had some people ask me, well, aren't you concerned that AI is going to replace what you do in the financial services business? And I'm like, no, because at the end of the day, somebody's always going to want to talk to a human being to figure this stuff out because the human being's the one that's had the real life experiences. But I love someone that gets really invested in getting educated and asking good questions because then they can figure out, hey, is this somebody I want to work with? I want to partner with? Because if they can't give you the answers you're looking for, then they haven't dove into the areas in that particular area of finance that you're really looking for guidance on. So to me, it holds people accountable, and I find it fascinating and also exciting when somebody says, "Hey, I did this research. I got 20 questions for you. Fantastic. Let's hit the ground running."
Well, and the difference between AI and someone like yourself, of course, AI is taking the collective knowledge of the universe, but it's really reducing that to the averages. Where, if you want an average answer, by all means, use an AI tool to get that.
Right.
But if you want something that is really deeply embedded in your specific context, an AI tool is certainly not today. Maybe someday, but today not anywhere near capable enough to do that for sure.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I
Right?
think I think it's a starting point, and it's a way to curate your thought process, but also to it can hold financial professionals accountable. Like to me, that's good. I don't mind people saying, "Well, I did this research or whatever." Great. Guess what? There's probably some things that you're missing there, right? So we can fill in the gaps, but again, to your point, we can also customize what you're really trying to accomplish and then utilize that as kind of a measuring stick to where you're really trying to go.
Love it. We have a follow-up question from the very first question, and she's asking that she says she has a secondary will to avoid probate. So we'll want to define what that is for
Yeah.
sure for everyone, and then make the distinction between a trust versus a secondary will. Does one provide more protection versus probate than the other? What are your thoughts?
So that term secondary will, I'm wondering if that is, I mean, again, if it's a will with an executor, the avoidance of probate, maybe it's state specific. I'm not sure. What we normally talk about is the utilization of a trust, a revocable living trust, is there to help avoid probate, but also list out specific areas that you're trying to accomplish things with certain assets. And again, states vary in that process. So I wouldn't want to go too far into that, but this is probably one of those areas where, and again, depending on the assets, depending on, your situation, sometimes having a conversation with a state attorney or an asset protection attorney is important, right? To get answers and say, hey, here's what I want to accomplish. Here's what I have as far as assets and, income and everything. And here's what I have as far as documentation and structure. Where are my gaps? That is a different conversation than asking, well, should I have this or should I have that? It's really more about structuring things from customization versus, well, should I have a trust or should I have this? It's not that. It's what do you want to accomplish and what documents or vehicles allow you to get there?
Love it. Next question is from Joe, who's saying, in terms of liquidity, it's a great question, maybe not an easy one to answer. How much of your net worth should be truly liquid?
Yeah, my simple answer to that, Joe, is it depends.
Yeah.
And when I say it depends, it really boils down to your objectives and what you're attempting to do with folks. I have some clients, depending on where they are in the life cycle of their business or their investment opportunities, where they have substantial liquidity. And the reason they have substantial liquidity is they're waiting for the next opportunity. What I will say is that more or less depends on your investment criteria and what asset classes you really want to be in. And the in a perfect world, you have all of your assets fully engaged in growth processes. But to what Victor was saying earlier, you can't necessarily do that if you also want to protect against risks, have safety, generate cash flow. Sometimes, liquidity is a byproduct of that. And you shouldn't just put money to work because, well, I just don't want it sitting around doing nothing. There's ways to have money liquid, but also have it working for you. You just have to obviously understand what those are, get educated, and figure out, okay, what's the benefit to me of having my money in these illiquid assets? Maybe it's tax driven, maybe the growth potential is higher. But that is an individual decision, and it also could be time horizon specific on where you might be with your different investment cycles.
Awesome. Well, I think that's the end of the questions that we have right now. What we're going to do is like I said, we're going to be holding a series of these over time. The next one will definitely dive much deeper into structure, talk more specifics about different types of trusts, testamentary trusts, irrevocable trusts, both from an asset protection perspective as well as a multi-generational wealth tool. And you'll definitely want to come back for that because there's going to be a lot of nuts and bolts in that particular session. One more time, John, what's the best way for folks to get in touch?
Our website, e3wealth.com. If anyone has questions or wants to reach out to us, there's a simple prompt there where they can get a hold of us.
And then for the folks that want to connect with us at Y Street Capital, info@ystreetcapital.com. And we're working close with John's team. We also have numerous investment opportunities that are available if that fits within your wheelhouse, and happy to have those conversations as well. And with that, thank you, John, for a great session, and for everyone else on the line, thank you for joining.